Today is Sunday. It's January the 8th, 2023, and we are coming with today's Heart of a Shepherd devotional. Now, we are temporarily leaving the book of Genesis, moving to Job, because Job is considered the oldest book of the Bible. In fact, our study of Job is because he's believed to have been a contemporary of Abraham, the patriarch, whom we met at the end of Genesis chapter 11. Now, the title of this devotional is From Riches to Rags. When things go from bad to worse. Now, just briefly, an introduction to the book of Job probably is necessary as we're continuing our chronological study. Now, there are several details about the book that will lead us to accept the conclusion that the names of ancient cities, which were names derived from men who were contemporaries of Abraham, puts the date of this book as one of the ancient books. In fact, the ancient book of the Bible. Now, notice with me as we introduce you to Job, the Old Testament patriarch, and I'm going to refer to him as Job the man, verses 1 through 5 of chapter 1. Now, the book of Job introduces us to the man whose name it bears. However, we are not presented with any background of the man, nor how he became so incredibly wealthy. Instead, we read in Job chapter 1 and verse 1, there was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. And that man was perfect and upright, one that feared God and eschewed evil. Now, the exact location of the land of Uz is one of speculation. However, there are cities mentioned in this book that were located in the land later identified as Edom. And so we might place Uz in that geographical region, which would be southeast of today's Israel on the border of Jordan to the east and Egypt to the south. Yet, it's not Job's birthplace, but his character that identifies him as an important figure in the Bible. Arguably, he was what God would want every believer to be: perfect, upright, one that fears God, and one that eschews or shuns evil. Now, the word perfect means to be blameless, guiltless, a man of integrity. To be upright is to be righteous and honest before God, and of course being a God-fearing man who reveres his Creator and hates or shuns evil. Now, you'll notice in Job chapter 1 and verse 2 that Job was blessed with a large family. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, so 10 children that we are introduced to in verse 2. He was also, according to verse 3, a man of great wealth. And in our story, verse 4, we find Job and his children, adults, with their own households, sharing in their father's wealth, enjoying the bounty of their own riches. Now, as a family, we find they observed a week of feast days, perhaps as a celebration of the harvest. Well, when the feast days were ended, Job, acting as a spiritual priest of his household, summoned his children to offer sacrifices to God, reasoning, it may be, verse 5, that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. And thus did Job continually. In other words, it was his practice. Now, notice the last phrase, thus did Job continually, in verse 5. Worship, sacrifices were a part of Job's life, and one he did not take lightly as the spiritual head of his family. Now, that brings us to a heavenly council. Job chapter 1, verses 6 through 12. Now, in verse 6, we're carried into the midst of a heavenly council where, and I quote, the sons of God, believed to be angels, were standing before God's throne. Well, in their midst, in the midst of these sons of God, these angels, was none other than Satan, the serpent, the wicked one, the fallen angel, Lucifer, the spiritual adversary of God and man. Well, the Lord inquired of Satan, whence comest thou? Where are you coming from? And Satan answered, from going to and fro in the earth, from walking up and down in it. Verse 7. God then turned the focus of the heavenly council to a man in whom he had found great joy. And so the Lord looked and asked Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job? that there is none like him in the earth, perfect, upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. Well, Satan, evidencing his adversarial heart, questioned God, disparaged Job, and asked, Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast not thou felt a hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands. His substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now, touch all that he hath, and he'll curse thee to thy face. That's verses 9 through 11. And so we find verses 12 through 19, what I have described as from riches to rags. Now the Lord accepted Satan's challenge, gave him liberty to accost Job in a series of devastating trials. Mercifully, God limited the extent of the devil's power and commanded him, verse 12, Behold, all that he hath, that is all that Job hath, is thy power. Only upon himself, upon Job, put not forth thine hand. So Satan departed from God's presence, and he initiated a series of disastrous events that destroyed all of Job's earthly possessions, verses 13 through 17. Well, then notice in verse 18 through 19, eventually the devil's assault took that which was dearest to Job, his sons and his daughters. Well, Satan had slandered Job and had suggested that he was faithful to the Lord only because he had been lavishly blessed and protected by him. And so now we need to ask the question as we look at verse 11, how did Job respond to his losses? Did he curse God as Satan alleged he would? Well, as you look at verses 21 now, rather than reprove his Creator, Job responded with humility and acknowledged God's sovereignty over his creation. Then Job worshiped the Lord, and he prayed, Yahweh, the Lord gives. Yahweh, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of Yahweh, the Lord. Well, contrary to Satan's accusations, Job, we read in verse 22, sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Now notice Job 2 as we just summarize this one chapter. And I would suggest Job, his body afflicted, his friends' inquisition. Now, a thorough study of Job 2, it will have to wait until another time in another year. However, Job 2 records a second heavenly council, verses 1 through 3, and introduces a trial that will afflict Job's body and rob him of his health, verses 4 through 7. Now you will meet in chapter 2 Job's wife, who questions why Job maintains his integrity in the midst of sorrows and even suggests that he curse God and die. You're going to also meet Job's 3 friends, and we'll follow them through our study, and they assert Job's losses are a punishment for unconfessed sin. Well, here's a closing thought for you. Satan is a real person and an adversary of believers. However, God limits his power and influence. When trials come, and they will, we can trust God knowing he is intensely interested in our souls and our well-being. Indeed, it might be said, Romans 8:28, we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. I challenge you today, trust God. His way is perfect. God bless him. Bye-bye.